Hello, in this video I will explain two aspects of what it takes to secure access to executive decision makers at the customer. There will be a little on relationship selling and perhaps more importantly on how suppliers can determine how critical their products and services are to the customer. My premise is that the more critical your offering is to your customer, the better your access to seniors will be. When following the advice provided in this video, you should be clearer about how important your offering is to your various customers and whether you are targeting the right people. Salespeople have always wanted to get as close as possible to the person making the buying decision, as it can be the fastest route to a sale. And so they're usually well aware of the risk of wasting valuable time with people becoming involved who have little or no authority to decide. It's one of their frustrations of having to deal with procurement professionals, a role so mainstream now in our organizations that few salespeople can confidently say that professional buyers are not a threat to their established relationships with product or service users. Professional buyers will often aim to project an image of being at the very center of the decision-making process. Suppliers are sometimes, and not always subtly, reminded of procurement's role as primary contact. And the importance of being seen at the heart of decision making comes from procurement status anxiety. It wants to be seen to be in charge, and it's reinforced through its use of the category management process in guiding sourcing decisions. This systematic and somewhat mechanistic category management approach is beyond the understanding of most salespeople, and so it can be very intimidating for the salesperson or account manager who is forced to engage with it, particularly where they have previously become used to getting easy access to non-procurement decision makers. But category management is here to stay, and with technology enablement, including artificial intelligence, the gap between it and traditional relationship selling is widening. For a long time, the method of trying to influence the right decision makers has been relationship selling, which is fundamentally about consciously identifying key people at the customer and seeking to build a close and dependable relationship with them. Engage with and satisfy the right people and the sale will be easier to make. Relationship selling requires you to take an interest in individuals and deepen your connection, build trust and then loyalty, so that buying decisions like the choice of supplier from a pool of bidders goes in your favor. There's nothing suspect about this approach to selling. It can work very effectively. Even as someone with a professional buying background, I respond to it in much the same way as other people. Us procurement folks aren't always hostile. I've developed quite a few friendships with people who have previously sold to me. But as a strategy for selling, focusing on deepening relationships has, especially with corporate professional buyers, become less effective, not least because recent research has suggested there are on average around 7 people involved in today's sourcing decisions. The phrase "people buy from people" is all very well, but realistically it's almost impossible for the average salesperson or account manager to build solid or deep relationships with so many different decision makers. It's useful to think about the different type of decision maker, or buyer if you like, that can have an influence on whether the business is awarded to one supplier or another. This has implications for who the salesperson should be establishing relationships with. So let's consider these different decision makers and what makes them different, and place the procurement role in the picture. Firstly, there is the user, the person who will actually use the product or service provided by the supplier. They're more often than not only focused on utility. Is the product or service useful to them in helping them do their job? Price can be a secondary consideration, not least as someone else in the company will be looking after that, usually the procurement person. Getting the job done is their primary concern. Then there is the technical specifier who, depending on the customer, could be a design engineer or functional head, or indeed the professional buyer. The first and second types, say the designer or the business functional head, are concerned with whether the product or service meets the technical specification. The third type of technical specifier, the procurement professional, is concerned about compliance to the tendering process and whether best value for money can be achieved. The supporter is someone who wants the salesperson to win the business and will go out of their way to keep channels of communication open whilst providing guidance to the salesperson. This person can be the same as the user, but it can equally be someone the salesperson has known for some time and where past actions have created a bond of trust. They may not be part of the official sourcing team, but they are influential and can help the salesperson navigate the system and politics of the customer organization. And finally, there is the budget holder, otherwise known as the formal approver. Although the procurement team will have significant autonomy over sourcing decisions, complex services and high-value project purchases frequently only go ahead following the approval of a senior decision maker. Salespeople really like to build close relationships with the budget holder, not least because it can simplify and expedite the buying process. It also has the potential of short-circuiting others who may slow up or challenge the decision, those pesky procurement folks again. Budget holders typically occupy the executive offices of the customer organization, and although relationships with them are highly coveted by salespeople, they're hard to access. So, 4 key buyer types: the user, the technical specifier, the supporter, and the budget holder. If the supplier's product or service is critical, it will have a much better chance of capturing the attention of those senior budget holders and other decision makers at the customer. The question for those salespeople is, how can they increase the chances of them being successful in this regard? Firstly, they have to understand what being critical means. One way of looking at this challenge comes from the book Sourcing Portfolio Analysis by Andrew Cox. Cox was a professor in strategy and procurement at the University of Birmingham throughout the 90s and the early part of this century. He and his research team did pioneering work into understanding power and negotiating leverage in supply chains, and he's been a huge influence on procurement leaders and the smartest practitioners right up to the present day. One of Cox's ideas was that of mapping product and service criticality, and it's an analysis that's useful for salespeople in helping them firstly get beyond the hype surrounding their own products and services and see their utility from their customer perspective, and then secondly, appreciate that criticality on one dimension doesn't necessarily mean that the customer's professional buyers will see the supplier in the same way. And thirdly and finally, to target the key people at the customer and those they may be neglecting. Furthermore, as a supplier, instead of assuming that you're strategically important and maybe even overselling to a busy and distracted buyer, knowing how critical your product or service is to a particular customer will help in constructing better targeted value propositions for those people at the customer who have differing needs. Just consider the different business functions at a typical customer. Procurement is primarily interested in cost savings, and undoubtedly finance is too. But you may also find marketing is mainly interested in how a supplier can contribute to its brand offering. Operations will certainly be interested in reliability of the supplier to deliver on time and that it complies with the specification. And design may be particularly keen to tap into the supplier's best ideas and innovation potential. Returning to the issue of relationship selling, criticality analysis can certainly help salespeople target the right people and ultimately be more realistic about the relationship potential of each. Criticality can be viewed on 2 dimensions: commercial criticality and operational criticality. The commercial criticality spectrum runs from barely registering in the customer's cost priorities to having serious cost, revenue and profit impact. But for simplicity's sake, we can view it as low impact to high impact. The operational criticality axis runs from low, i.e. there is easy availability of substitutes, for example basic office supplies, through to the most important deliveries required for the customer to maintain operations, which could be IT services, for example. Depending on the assessment of commercial and operational criticality, some suppliers have a high chance of building relationships with senior executive decision makers, but others will struggle to even get an audience with a junior buyer. If we consider suppliers that are low both on the commercial and operational criticality axes, then the supplier's focus should be on good housekeeping or no nasty surprises for the customer. Supplies in this quadrant are often the responsibility of those junior buyers or category managers. They're just not important enough to capture the attention of seniors. Therefore, aspirations to make deeper connections with senior executives are probably misplaced. It almost certainly won't happen. If the product or service is operationally critical but rates low on commercial criticality, the supplier must focus on ensuring continuity of supply, on time in full, all of the time. A supplier value proposition based on supply risk elimination should go down well with senior executives in operations, which could include plant managers or ICT directors. Procurement will be in a support role here. Alternatively, procurement will be taking a prominent, maybe the dominant role when it comes to supplies that are commercially critical but not necessarily operationally critical. After all, optimizing supply chain costs and value is procurement jobs. Supplies in the upper left quadrant will come under diligent procurement scrutiny. In these circumstances, the supplier's salesperson or account manager simply can't ignore the professional buyer, and in all likelihood they will be interfacing with assertive and experienced professionals who will demand savings and other improvements. Establishing a relationship with the Chief Procurement Officer may well be possible here. Finally, if the supplier is providing services and/or products that are highly critical on both dimensions, then they will be high profile, and the supplier's account manager and seniors at the supplier will most likely have long-term relationships with seniors at the customer. Value, supply continuity, innovation, and future relationship potential will all be under the spotlight. Criticality analysis can be very helpful to the supplier sales director in allocating resources, identifying key stakeholders at the customer, and for deciding whether to get personally involved in relationship development. For the salesperson, it provides guidance on who best to target for making contact. It can save the salesperson wasting a lot of time dealing with people who aren't close to the heart of decision making, and it can certainly help the supplier construct better value propositions that are more meaningful to the customer organization. For those in sales, these are the questions I recommend you think about. Number 1. What proportion of the customer's cost of sales do your products and services represent? Is it high or low? 2. Is your offering a priority for the procurement function? 3. Who at the customer is most concerned about supply continuity and performance risk? And 4. Are alternative solutions available to the customer? In other words, can the customer get along without your supplies? A few key learning points. Relationship selling can help in sales performance, but only if you're connecting with the right people. Understanding how critical your services and products are to the customer's operations and to those managing cost and value once again helps you target the right people and create more compelling value propositions. It's more realistic to accept that access to senior executives is not always possible or even desirable. Other people in the customer may well be leading the buying decision. I will explain more on that in the next video.